In the brutal storm of the Second World War, there was one weapon that filled German soldiers with dread, not because of how fast it fired, but because of the overwhelming force behind every single shot. While Allied troops feared the terrifying rate of fire of German machine guns, the German army hated something else entirely: the tremendous power of the Browning M2 heavy machine gun and its massive 50 Browning machine gun cartridge. It did not earn grim nicknames like Meat Chopper or Kraut. For nothing but the true story behind its creation and the way it carved its name into history is far darker and far more disturbing than many realize. So let us return to the beginning and uncover how this feared weapon came to life. During the First World War, armies quickly learned how decisive machine guns were, but early designs fired the same ammunition used in infantry rifles, and when armored aircraft and tanks appeared on the battlefield, their thin protection easily shrugged off rifle-caliber fire. This proved the need for something with a far heavier punch, so General John Pershing demanded a new machine gun capable of destroying aircraft armor and vehicles far more effectively than the standard .30 caliber weapons then in service. That order was handed to John Browning, the most renowned firearms designer in the United States. Browning received strict requirements to create a machine gun that could fire a half-inch projectile at a velocity greater than 2,700 feet each second, a dramatic increase over anything he had ever built. To achieve that, he took his dependable water-cooled M1917 .30 caliber machine gun and enlarged its design to handle a completely new and far more powerful cartridge. That new cartridge was essentially an enlarged version of the 3006 round-built rimless for smooth feeding and influenced partly by the captured German 13.2 mm anti-tank rifle cartridge. It became the 50 Browning machine gun round, written as 12.7 by 99 mm. No one knew then that this cartridge would become one of the most effective and widely used rounds on the planet, with a long future ahead. After much testing, the first prototype entered production as the M1921, a water-cooled heavy machine gun mainly intended for shooting down aircraft. Early trials investigated whether it could be used elsewhere, but things did not look encouraging. Infantry soldiers could barely move it, because the water-cooled version weighed roughly 120 pounds, while the lighter air-cooled model still weighed more than 80 pounds, and its tripod added another 44 pounds, making a complete setup weigh between 130 and 170 pounds, and that did not include ammunition, which was also extremely heavy. Its recoil was punishing, making accurate fire difficult, and early aircraft could not easily mount it. Even vehicles struggled to use it because the weapon could only be fed from the left side, which caused problems in cramped turrets. At first it seemed the gun would be useful only as a coastal anti-aircraft weapon, but the story was far from over. John Browning passed away in the year 1926, yet development continued, and engineers refined his design. Internal parts were modified, so operators could switch the feeding direction from left to right simply by changing the top cover. A universal receiver was developed, allowing it to accept a water-cooled barrel, a heavy air-cooled barrel, or a light air-cooled aircraft barrel. With these changes, the weapon finally showed real promise, and after further improvements, it gained its iconic name, the Browning Machine Gun M2. By this time, other nations had switched to larger autocannons of 20 or 30 millimeters, but American planners believed that the high velocity and versatility of the .50 caliber made it more valuable, so production continued, and the outbreak of the new global conflict proved just how right they were. As the Second World War erupted, the United States already had M2s in many roles: fixed guns on aircraft, anti-aircraft weapons, on ships, bombers, and vehicles, and of course on tripods for infantry. They were effective against nearly anything on the battlefield. Early in the war, the biggest demand came from aircraft, where lighter barrels and tuned internals allowed rates of fire from around 500 to more than 1,200 rounds each minute, nearly matching the fearsome German MG-42, though the M2 used these extreme settings only for short bursts, because aircraft had only moments to fire at targets. Some aircraft carried astonishing numbers of them. The famous flying fortress, the B-17 in its G model, carried up to 13 of them in various turrets. The P-47 Thunderbolt used 8 with 4 in each wing, while the Douglas A-26 Invader took things even, further mounting up to 18 with 8 in the nose, 4 in each wing, and 2 in the turret. The M2 proved vastly superior to lighter 30 caliber guns because it delivered the right balance of rate of firepower and range. A single burst could rip through aircraft engines with ease, especially with armor-piercing rounds, and when several M2s fired together, nothing on the battlefield was safe. American fighter aircraft shredded locomotives, armored vehicles, and even tanks from above, because roof armor was thin. Very soon, the heavy barrel version of the M2 became standard on nearly every American vehicle. By the year 1945, millions of M2s had been produced, making it the most manufactured machine gun in history, and German forces were stunned by how many the Americans fielded. This also made any German low-flying aircraft attack far more dangerous because nearly every Jeep half-track or tank carried a 50. Tanks mounted them on the rear of the turret, so a crewman could stand on the engine deck and fire upward at attacking aircraft, though he was exposed to enemy fire. Before discussing combat experiences, here is a clear explanation of why the Browning's barrel moves backward when firing. The M2 works on the short-recoil principle. The barrel and bolt begin locked together and move rearward as one piece after firing, which keeps the cartridge case fully supported while pressure is high, preventing it from rupturing during extraction. After moving back roughly 1 centimeter, the barrel stops, while the bolt continues rearward, ejecting the spent cartridge. The recoil spring pushes the bolt forward again, feeding a new round from the disintegrating belt, chambering it, and firing again as long as the trigger remains pressed. Now we reach why German soldiers truly hated facing the American 50. First, American forces relied increasingly on overwhelming firepower, and the German army feared this doctrine deeply. The Americans never ran short on ammunition like the Germans often did, and it seemed that every vehicle or aircraft carried at least one heavy machine gun. Being targeted by 50 caliber fire was nothing like facing smaller rounds. The 50 had vastly superior range and power. Compare the 8mm Mauser round used in the MG-42 with the massive 50, and the difference becomes clear. The 50 delivered between 5 and 10 times more energy than standard infantry weapons. This meant soldiers hiding behind brick or concrete walls were no longer safe, as rounds could punch straight through and kill anyone behind them, or sustained bursts could collapse entire wall sections or tear apart sandbag positions. Even armored tanks like the Panzer IV could have optics, damaged tracks broken, or turrets jammed when hit from the side or rear. Lightly armored Japanese tanks in the Pacific were particularly vulnerable, and many were destroyed by 50 caliber fire during Banzai charges when American forces opened up with everything they had. There is also a persistent myth that the 50 was banned by the Geneva Conventions because of the horrific wounds it inflicted. This was false, but the effects on the human body were indeed gruesome. Being struck by a 50 caliber round almost always meant losing the limb hit or dying instantly, and many German soldiers saw the horrific results firsthand. The energy transfer was so devastating that describing it fully would violate platform rules, but anyone can imagine the effect. Because of this, German units changed tactics when facing American heavy machine guns, relying on snipers' tanks or indirect fire to silence them. And the Germans had nothing equal to it. Their heaviest infantry machine guns, the MG-34 and MG-42, relied on the 8mm Mauser round, which lacked the sheer destructive force of the .50 Browning machine gun cartridge. The closest German equivalent was their 13mm aircraft machine gun, but it was never used widely on the ground. The Germans even planned to mount captured M2s on their U-boats when surfaced, and produced copies of .50 Browning machine gun ammunition for that purpose, showing how much they respected the weapon, though it saw limited actual use. Now, before we explore terrifying modifications of the M2, let us examine the different ammunition types used. The standard round was a full metal jacket ball projectile already capable of great destruction. Then there were armor-piercing rounds that could penetrate about 1 inch of hardened steel. Incendiary rounds were designed to ignite fuel or flammable surfaces, making them extremely effective against aircraft. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds combined penetration with fire. Armor-piercing incendiary tracer added a tracer element to help gunners track their fire, especially in anti-aircraft roles or at long range, since the .50 Browning machine gun could remain effective beyond 2 kilometers. Belts were usually loaded with a yi-tui-tai-di mix, including a tracer every 5th round, while aircraft belts used combinations suited for dogfights or ground attacks. After the war, new specialized rounds appeared like the Raufoss multipurpose round, combining a tungsten core, a small explosive charge, and incendiary material producing fragmentation similar to a small autocannon shell. The SLAP round, short for Sabbated Light Armor Penetrator, used a dense subcaliber penetrator similar to tank ammunition, giving exceptional armor penetration, and was often used in sniper rifles because of its cost. Speaking of sniper rifles, the .50 Browning machine gun cartridge impressed the American military so much that they built long-range rifles around it. The most famous example is Carlos Hathcock, the legendary sniper of the Vietnam War, who attached a scope to an M2 and used single shots to engage distant targets, achieving confirmed kills. His work inspired the creation of the Barrett M82 anti-materiel rifle, chambered in .50 Browning machine gun, which later became iconic. Of course, no story of the .50 is complete without the Quad 50. When one heavy machine gun was not enough, engineers combined 4 M2s into a single turret, the M45 Maxim mount. It was originally designed to defend against low-flying aircraft, but because hitting fast targets required high volumes of fire, the rate of fire was multiplied by 4, producing nearly 40 rounds each second. The Germans had a similar concept using quadruple 20mm autocannons, but those systems were heavier. The Quad 50 was lighter, more flexible, electrically traversed, and able to rotate rapidly and elevate straight upward. It could be placed on the ground or mounted on vehicles, and once Allied air superiority grew, crews turned these deadly mounts against ground targets with devastating results. The Quad 50 continued serving in Korea and Vietnam, often mounted on trucks to protect convoys from ambushes. But for all its power, being a .50 caliber gunner meant enormous danger. The distinctive sound smoke and muzzle flash quickly attracted enemy attention, yet for too long early vehicle and tank gunners had no protective shields, leaving them exposed to small arms fire. Shields became common only during the Vietnam War, and even later vehicles like early Humvees lacked proper protection, until heavy losses forced the adoption of turrets, and eventually remote weapon stations where gunners remained safely inside, using cameras, laser rangefinders, and night or thermal vision. Modern systems allow the M2 to be mounted alongside other weapons or grenade launchers. It is astonishing that a weapon once considered too heavy and impractical became one of the longest-serving designs in military history, still used today, with only minor updates like the M2A1, which features a faster barrel change, flash suppressor, and a manual safety. Much like the iconic MG42, it is remarkable that such an old design has survived into the modern era. But the M2 Browning goes even further, its roots reaching all the way back to the First World War. And yet it remains one of the most effective and trusted heavy machine guns ever created, with no retirement in sight.